Welcome back. We're kind of on, again, the downhill slide here. We're on the fifth segment of chapter 7, and we're going to try to start to pull some of these issues. I don't really call them issues, but focus points, let's say, of a macroeconomic analysis, or economists, what they do on a daily basis. So we've been talking about GDP. We talked about, inflation, price levels, CPI, price indexes in general. We just are in the process of winding up unemployment. We're going to try to, in this chapter and some of the other, subsequent chapters, trying to tie these together so that as you build out your toolbox, you're going to know how to tie it together and be a very valuable asset to either your current employer or your future employer. And so let's talk about workers and that in the employment level of employment. They're constantly moving, and it could be kind of like Schumpeter talked about creative destruction, because you've got new companies opening up, new opportunities, old companies, old ways of doing things fading, being replaced by bigger, better, faster places that, companies that people really want to work for. So, you've got them laid off, and they start to look at frictional and structural unemployment. And, basically, frictional and structural unemployment, it's just the natural progression that you're going to see in a dynamic economy. Things, just constantly changing, moving forward. Every nation trying to ensure that steady growth, ensure that they can push that production possibility curve farther out, and to improve the well-being and satisfaction, and basically help the society optimize that utility function that everybody has. The one thing we didn't talk about just briefly was people move not only because the company makes the decision that you need to move on. They also move because it's personal reasons. Unfortunately, for most individuals and most companies, if you want to secure increases in your wages, increases in your annual salary, if you want to, secure job promotions, it's easier to do it moving from one company to the next. Not to say you can't do it if you stay with one company for a long haul or a long period of time. It's just slower and more difficult to accomplish those personal goals. Your increases in salaries, sometimes 2 to 3% a year, which it takes forever. If you jump from one company to another, you may get a 20-30% increase in salary just by making that jump. So, and it's it's the same thing with job promotion. You could have you might be an individual contributor and you want to get into middle management, and there's this logjam of middle management, and for something to open up in middle management, something has to open up in kind of the not the senior management team, but kind of director, VP level. So supervisors, managers that want to move up to director and VP, they have to wait for something to open, and at that point they can move up. Then that gives the opportunity for individual contributors to move up. It's just a long and, I'm going to say, to some extent, arduous process if you stay with the same company. So for personal reasons, you have just a lot of individuals jumping ship, moving from one company to the next. Saw it a lot in 2020, 2021. I had, several individuals that came to me and said, hey, XYZ company down the street offered me a $5,000 raise and I'm going to take it. And it didn't matter how much you sat down and walked them through, and we ran the numbers together, and they saw $5,000, and they were mostly young employees. Maybe working for me was the first job out of college, and somebody throws them a bone for $5,000, and it's just too much for them to forget about it, and they make that jump. And so that's what happens in a dynamic, market economy. Things like that happens, personal reasons, nothing you can do about it. Wish them the best, and if they're a really good employee, tell them if they ever change their mind, want to come back, you'll be more than happy to sit down and talk to them about the potential to bring them back into the company. And then we talked about the natural unemployment rate, and it's the frictional unemployment rate plus the structural unemployment rate. Those are the two components, or the two types of unemployment that make up the natural unemployment rate. Whereas the actual unemployment rate is fictional plus structural plus cyclical. And that leaves us, again, get into this math magic, and you start, combining terms and reshuffling things, that, the unemployment rate is really the natural unemployment rate plus the cyclical unemployment rate. And so with that in mind, it's that unemployment rate, it's that single number that most policymakers see. The unemployment rate in 2022 is going to, it's been like 6%, whatever the rate was. And, for 2023, it's going to come in, first half of the year, it looks like it's going to come in at, 4% unemployment rate. They see that number, but policymakers and even the individuals at the BLS, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, they have a real problem taking that unemployment rate number, that single metric number, and breaking it down to say this much is frictional, this much is structural, this much is cyclical. So you've got policymakers out there trying to make decisions on how to drive the policies that's going to drive growth and keep it plugging along and humming along at a certain level without additional information. It makes it really difficult for them. So, they talk about in the text, how do you get rid of frictional? How do you get rid of structural? What do you do about cyclical unemployment? Frictional, it's more, again, it's short term, and it's maybe not a bad thing, because frictional unemployment exists to a certain extent where individuals, they may take a job and they get in this job and they think, man, this job's just not for me. And they quit and they get another job, and, they play around with it, and eventually they'll find that job. And so they stop the job hopping or job hunting. And it's a lot of it is driven by, information flow. How does the flow of information, 20, 30 years ago, you got your information maybe from the local newspaper, the want ads. I got my first job in DC in 1989, and I can't remember the name of the rag, but there was a little newspaper that came out. It was Federal something. It was named this little paper that came out every Thursday morning, and you picked it up at convenience stores. It's a free newspaper, and it had all the government job listings, State Department, Labor Department, Commerce, and people be standing in line for those stores to open so they could grab that paper, because there was a lot of shuffling going on in DC among the federal job market. So technology. Huge number of state and federal sources for employment information, depending on the level of your skill set. You've got monster LinkedIn, Indeed, just a lot of different opportunities to garner information that's going to help this matching process, help you match your skill sets with what you think your skill sets in that perfect job are going to be. So technology, automation, just the internet, information is a lot more readily available, but there's still mismatches. There's no way around the mismatches that occur. And then you've got the structural unemployment, as we talked about. It's differing skill sets. It's, one economy or one type of job, is eliminated with automation. AI is going to do some of that. Machine learning is going to do some of it, create some different jobs. So it's going to take some skills, some training, some type of educational opportunities for displaced workers. And it's what actually makes this structural unemployment's so difficult to some extent is just these institutional, like the unions, you've got laws, you've got regulations that inhibit the opportunity somewhat in the frictional market, but more so in the structural unemployment market for individuals to grab that job that they like. And again, in an environment where an employer is trying to fill positions with qualified candidates, if there's a lot of push from unions, if there's a lot of laws and regulations and hoops they have to jump through, they either don't fill positions, or they freeze positions, or they just underhire and they have jobs open. And again, they're not sitting out there on that production possibility curve at that point. And then you've got, again, the cyclical unemployment. You usually see it in recessions. What happens in recessions, people actually start somewhat hoarding money. They're a little more cautious about how they spend money because they don't know, they've gone through the expansion and man, things were great and they were spending money and they were making money, and then it hits that peak and it starts down through the recession and as it heads toward that trough, they don't know how long it's going to take to get to that trough before it starts around and starts back up on the expansion side of it. So it gets to that next peak, or that next, peak within the business cycle. And so they will actually hoard and try to, curtail their spending, and they'll put off buying decisions. And what happens is the government at that point, to kind of help curtail, the cyclical unemployment, is they will provide some, temporary one-time transfer payments, rebates from your taxes, government spending. They, pass it out and say, here, go forth and spend. And and so as that's happening, so they're either trying to bump it that way, or they're trying to replace that evaporated spending, so it helps come out of that recession up, hits a trough and starts up that expansion side again. Unfortunately, it pushes unemployment below its natural rate, and as we've talked about in, I guess it was chapter 6. You're pumping money in the economy, and what happens then? It starts to heat up inflation. So policymakers have to be extremely careful there. The last, couple of things we want to touch on, it's just the data information that, methodology we use. It just hampers policy and decision makers, because none of these metrics that we've talked about are perfect. They could all be greatly improved upon, and we tried over the years, and we'll continue to try as economists, especially macroeconomists, will try to improve those, whether it's with the BEA or whether it's the BLS. I mean, they're going to try to improve them, but you've got GDP, you've got inflation, consumer price index, you've got the unemployment rate, and they are at best flawed metrics, but again, they're the best we have at this particular point in time. Because don't ever forget, what we're trying to do on the policy side of the house is ensure that we are maintaining full employment. You want to eliminate the cyclical unemployment rate, and more importantly, as a country, we're trying to make sure that we are producing the right thing, producing the right commodity, the right product, the right goods or service. And we want to make sure that we are producing whatever this right thing is at a magnitude that gets us to full employment. So hope you've enjoyed kind of our run through chapter 7, talking about unemployment. It gets a little depressing at times, because if you've ever been unemployed, or if you've ever been kind of in between jobs, or if you've ever been that college student that is spent 4 years studying to be some occupation, and they get out of college, and lo and behold, they can't find a job. It's really difficult. And so I'm sure fortunately, you've never been in those situations personally, but I think it's extremely important to understand the stress on society, the stress on the family unit, that whether it's frictional, structural, or cyclical unemployment, it doesn't matter. It just creates a stressful situation for society in general, and it's not great for the well-being of society. We're not at full employment. There are just a lot of issues with it. So hope you've enjoyed chapter 7. We'll jump into chapter 8, not too long from now. And we'll start talking about aggregate demand and aggregate supply. And you'll start seeing how some of these tools that you picked up in chapters 1 through chapter 7 are going to start to apply to aggregate demand and aggregate supply when we get into chapter 8. So hope everybody is looking as forward to it as I am, and we will touch base soon. Thank you.